think the main thing that we're seeing when people are talking about these numbers is that they're measuring the symptom rather than the root cause. Because when you're looking at 2.6% growth for assets on a year where inflation was, say, 3%, that doesn't actually mean that you've grown, you've actually shrunk. From that perspective, it's not necessarily that members are closing accounts en masse, but what we are seeing is that they're soft switching. They're quietly rerouting, some of their direct deposits to SoFi. And so, something as small as that also impacts how these members are going to grow with you in the future. And that's a whole kind of opportunity cost of lost future growth with any member that is, either that you have and that is silently leaving for one of the big banks, or members that, could have been a great member for you, but ended up going sort of with the default. So I think what happens when you're looking at just the growth numbers, you're not looking at the growth number in absolute terms. You have to look at it, in context of some of these other numbers. And the main thing I think that we're worried about and that our credit unions are working against is this loss of primacy with this consolidation of megabanks. So, one of the interesting things that we see in the data is that net interest margins widened to 3.7%, but average return on assets still went down. And I think, when margins are up and profitability is down, that's because you're bleeding cash in one of a few places. Some of those places that I think a lot about is in untargeted marketing, especially when so much of what credit unions are trying to do is acquire more members. There are other places, things like inefficient collections and fraud, and lots of other places where you can really see some of those inefficiencies. And the good news is that there are actually solutions for a lot of these things that any credit union, no matter their size, whether they're 20 billion or whether they're 100 million in assets, that they can do to start improving in very short order the type of efficiency and see some of that profitability go up. I do think that credit unions can see a lot of this impact and ROI much faster than they would think. One of the things that if I started, a new job as a CMO at a credit union tomorrow, one of the things that I would really do away with, at least at first, is the generic mailers and kind of spray and pray type of marketing. What we've seen is that when you're really spending your focus and effort on targeting the right prospects, the right members in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that works for the channels that they're likely to engage with the offers that make the most sense, you can end up targeting a much smaller number of potential members or even existing members that you could grow your relationship with and get much higher results. I mean, we've seen some of our partners get, through some of the most difficult but also viable channels like direct mail, where cost of acquisition went down by 80% below market standards, and see, at the same time, 20% market growth in entry markets that they're growing into at the same time. And this is not a credit union that had unlimited resources. We're talking about a marketing team of 3 or 4 people. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't spend any money on awareness campaigns, but I would probably say to shift some of the weight on the, from the kind of general brand awareness to something that is more targeted. I have seen brand awareness be extremely successful when done really, really cleverly, right? So if you look at some of the campaigns that our partner Whitefish has put out as they grew into their new market in Missoula, it's just so creative and so engaging that kind of brand awareness is legitimate. But that's rare, and also, having that with an experience that ends up being spray and pray and the same for all of your members beyond that is still not going to get prospects or members to engage with the credit union over, kind of a more default path that other people might be going into. I think it would have to be the silent exit. Part of what we do a lot of is retention modeling and attrition modeling, and it turns out it's not so simple as this member churned or not. One of the things that we're seeing a lot of is the silent exit, where you're starting to miss out on opportunity costs that you just didn't even know that would potentially come to you, and even worse, seeing some of the money that members have with you silently rerouted to a competitor. And that is not something that every credit union necessarily has been looking on, in the same way that they might just look at member growth up and down. And that is data that every credit union already has. Doesn't require any enrichment, doesn't require any kind of special sauce there. But what is really useful when you're looking at that kind of signal, it gets a much earlier signal than when you're looking at just binary. But beyond that, if you can identify who are the members who are at risk of disengaging, and you have additional data about how else they engage with you, who are they, why might they be leaving, I think that those signals together, which is again something that every credit union can start to dig into, are just a trove of strategic insight. And the outcome of that type of investigation will be different for every credit union, but it's the right question to ask, because it's how you make sure that you build the right solution to these kinds of problems. And maybe attrition is not what your credit union is dealing with, but I think for most credit unions that are struggling, besides difficulty with acquisition, is this member base that is getting harder to engage. When we're talking to credit unions, their superpower has always been that personal connection. Think about it as an onion, right? You might go to Chase and they have a really nice kind of polished platform that you land on, and they use AI to personalize it, and it looks great. But the deeper you get into that onion, the less and less there's anyone to speak with, right? In a credit union, even the ones that might not have a super shiny outer shell, the deeper you get, that's really where the value of, I think, where most members see that credit union advantage. Now, there's of course the blanket way that a lot of the really big mega banks are taking AI to personalize everything, but it's almost this personalization that is that cold and total. Whereas really what credit unions are fighting for is for their members and their local charters. It's those these households and sometimes these businesses that are in their community. And because credit unions serve the entire community, whereas a lot of these mega banks just think, digital only, digital first, it ends up being designed for a very narrow slice of the population, which is exactly the area of opportunity where credit unions should swoop in and use data and AI carefully and intelligently in a way that really helps them scale up that unfair advantage in a way that is not just for the digital savvy members, even though of course that's important, but in a way that really speaks to every member, no matter what channels they engage with you through, to get that kind of experience that they expect from a credit union when they're comparing a credit union versus maybe one of the larger banks, outside of just the rates that can be offered.